I'd just like to start by acknowledging the Jagera people and the Turrbal people as the custodians of Meanjin, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. We are really excited to kick off session 2 of our mutual bank webinar series today, which is part of our broader mutual content series we launched last month, focused on building the bank of the future with open data. First, to a little bit of housekeeping. Questions can be asked at any time during the session, but we will only answer them at the end. This session is being recorded and will be made available to you shortly after the webinar. Today, we are diving into one of open banking's most popular use cases, money management. As we will see, the topic is much broader than just budgeting tools, and one that provides a real opportunity to both financially empower your customers and improve customer relationships. While some customers are financially literate, we should not forget that most are not, and they need help that is accessible, trusted, and easy to consume. This can come in the form of self-service or through your staff. In years gone by, we called this omni-channel delivery, but then we have always been good at buzzwords. We have been working with customer-owned banks since before the launch of CDR in 2020, helping them use financial data to deliver better customer outcomes. We're excited about the opportunities that open banking provides for customer-owned banks and delighted to be helping a number of them to bring this into life. Before we get to the panel, I would like to take a few minutes to set the scene. We have a short video to play that is a snapshot of video content from our Mutuals Hub that will help introduce today's session. Also, you'll get a sneak peek at our updated brand, which we are very proud of and will be launching later this year. So when we talk about money management, most people immediately think about budgeting tools. And although that's certainly part of it, the opportunity is much better. This slide starts to talk about improving the digital bank experience through insights, personalization, and new ways to communicate, as well as financial tools. Insights, for example, can come in one that I often show and give around bonus interest accounts. We know from research that we have done over 9 months ago now that our users of the Frollo money management app collectively lose 40,000 in interest throughout the year by not achieving their bonus interest, through not making that fifth deposit or that fourth purchase, so not meeting the T's and C's. Through the data that we collect through open banking, we're able to see the transactions that are of the customer. We're able to understand the product that they're on, and we could send, for example, an insight or a nudge to the app or somewhere else that basically says on the 25th of the month, if you don't make one more deposit by the end of the month, you'll lose exactly $20.15 in interest. And that example is a kind of composite insight that we have or that we can provide. This slide highlights what consumers most want from their banks. Key callouts being personalised offers and an aggregated view of all their accounts. If anything, COVID has meant banks are even more in people's lives. This next slide shows a few examples of banks already providing money management capability. Westpac, who purchased Money Brilliant, have started putting in those types of features or capability. PNN and BCU and beyond, mutual banks have started to use this type of capability to provide greater experience to their customers. And of course, Westpac, CBA and BOQ and VMA are also using these types of features. So this type of capability is now out there and being used. We'll go to the video.
Open banking brings for the first time the opportunity for mutuals to see their members' full financial life.
We believe that open banking, or open data as I prefer to call it, is a significant revolutionary change since digital banking was introduced many years ago.
Helping our practices made up of advisors and brokers deliver a great client experience.
And it's a great example of the power of open banking data as well. It's able to deliver them all the benefits of being able to see a 360-degree view of their members' financial life.
We now have frameworks, applications, the tools, the AI and machine learning algorithms to deliver pretty much any use case using open banking data.
That can help our customers, be it debt reduction, save up for their first car, save for their overseas trip, and really give them a tool to help them get there faster. We're also seeing opportunities in the lending space, and there'll be many others that will present themselves.
Additional service that a practice can deliver to customers to build future customers is really important value that we're delivering as well.
We found in selecting Frollo that they not only brought the products that we needed in terms of launching an open banking use case or offering, but rather also they brought knowledge, skill and advice with helping our open banking strategy and where we wanted to get to.
In particular, helping practices drive efficiency through access to high quality information in a timely manner. And it also assists them in enhancing their client experience as well.
It also has a benefit for mutuals and an opportunity for them to create products that speak directly to members' full financial needs.
Open banking will allow mutuals to build even more personalised offerings to their customers.
So I think mutuals really should think about the opportunities in open banking in two ways. How are you unique to your membership today as a mutual bank? And how is open banking going to help you deliver that unique value that you deliver for your members? How can it kind of supercharge that value, if you like?
I believe with where open banking is up to now, that you can start building the bank of the future centred around data and customer experience. Again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And thank you very much to our panel. Here with us today is Medina Cicak, Head of Lending Product Operations and Distribution, RACQ, and Chris Malcolm, General Manager Data Analytics and Open Banking P&N Group, and Simon Docherty, Chief Customer Officer from Frollo. So we'll start with a few questions to our panel. Just first, a general question. We're here to talk about money management, but before we do, I'm keen to get a general comment from Chris and Medina on how you feel about the rollout of open banking and the consumer data right in general.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tony. Happy to kick off. Look, I mean, I think it's of course, an opportunity not only for the banking industry but more broadly. What we've seen in terms of advancements, and I go right back, I guess, to, data analytics, and obviously what this is in its very simplest form is a new data set. So I think what that means is, it gives us more opportunity to, understand customers, help them in their financial journey from a banking perspective. And, really, I guess, help us kind of get closer. And then I think as it then continues in terms of the broader CDR, the opportunity for us to, help our customers in other parts of their lives that we may not be able to help them at the moment. I think there's some great opportunities there. Equally, I do encourage us to kind of look at the data that's available now and work through, I guess, the opportunities that are there in financial services, which I think there are many.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the opportunities are endless, and the rollout itself, we did hit a couple of bumpy roads across all aspects. And I think that's probably the part that's really, stifled the growth of this. We focus so much on building and getting to the point of regulatory requirements that we tended to focus on that rather than the opportunities that presented themselves around that data and analysing that data. And I think that's why right now the idea of what and the possibilities of what we can do is more important than ever, especially as we see CDR and open data really working on the other industries too, and collecting that data holistically for our members and for customers across Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and look, we use the term open banking, which is obviously, how it was kind of released. Obviously, people call it CDR. But then equally, there's also, I tend to try and use the term more often not open data, because I think open banking certainly restricts it, albeit I have to catch myself out sometimes in terms of, using that language more deliberately.
Yeah, and I do agree with you, Chris. I mean, certainly the concept of giving a consent from people is around allowing other people to make use of their data for a purpose that benefits them. And that doesn't have to be just open banking data. And I suppose it's good in relation to the pause that's there now, basically trying to see how the amount of money, that banks have spent actually can become worthwhile, not just from a regulation perspective. So,
yeah, it's interesting what you say, Tony, in terms of the pause, because and I've spoken about this sort of both internally and externally, and we'll probably get into this a little bit further. But I think the approach that we're taking, and sometimes we've seen some headlines around saying CDR is paused. Well, the reality is that I see it as kind of one step back for two steps forward, and I think it's quite sensible that continuing to put more and more data, telco, superannuation, insurance, etc., in the system at the velocity in which was intended, I think maybe just it becomes overwhelming. So I think actually stopping and pausing and kind of looking at what we've got, creating innovation, because I tell you what, there's a lot of data already there that can create innovation and new and different things. And I think what some of the headlines get as well is, the non-bank lenders have actually been brought forward, which tends to be kind of the bottom of the article, etc. So, I do think that it's quite a positive step and will actually bring some focus in terms of the outcomes.
Completely agree. And I think as we start to see more data within that ecosystem, it's really around understanding its purpose, the intent behind it from an organisational point of view, but from a member view. Why do they want people to know this information from us? Why do they want to share the information, and what benefits we can then provide backwards, instead of always starting off with what we can do with the data?
Yeah.
It's really around why are they sharing it, and that focus will absolutely change the way in which our members see us and trust us. And that is the key at the end of the day. For our members to provide us all this data, that is a high level of trust, and we need to take that on board and really ask them and bring that backwards.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. I think this certainly resonates with all the audience, I would say, that's watching, because everyone wants items fixed or done, improved, if you like, to really get the benefit. So let's move on to the next, to another question. So I guess, Chris and Medina, given mutual banks are customer first, clearly, we believe mutuals are unique in being more attuned to their customers' financial well-being. So that's a common, I think, aspiration from both Frollo and the mutual banks. Where do mutual banks see greatest value from money management and financial well-being solutions? Specifically, how can money management services help mutuals achieve stronger customer relationships?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. I think it's definitely a lot more than just budgeting. And as we all know, I'm very biased to the lending sphere, but money management is around understanding good lending, bad lending, and making the right choices. How do we get to a point where, we utilise money management as a way to really guide our customers and our members to make the right choices for their financial well-being in the long term and in the short term? And I think it's about that balance between the two.
Yeah, look, I think to continue on with that, Medina, as mutuals, we're here for, to empower our customers financially. Obviously, customer satisfaction rates of mutuals are, typically higher. Obviously, we want to continue to engage our customers or members, in terms of the value that we're adding to them. So I think, that's where I think, it's more than obviously a budgeting tool, because it's how do you kind of use those things as problem statements? How do we leverage this to help increase our engagement with customers, the frequency in which we work with them, and increase value, etc. They're the type of things that I ask ourselves and myself. And then I think that flows down into that financial empowerment in terms of I've had a change of life for whatever reason, or I'm at a different stage in my life. It could be as simple as, I want to save up for a car, or I'm actually saving for a mortgage, or I have a mortgage and I've just come off a cheap, fixed rate interest. And, so it's actually about kind of understanding, I guess, all the customer journey points. And then therefore, where this can actually help add value in that regard. And that's how I tend to think about this.
We see mutuals as offering something different than the big four, than the big banks do. And if you consider a context where the capability exists to access the banking data your customers have with other banks, then would this help you increase share of wallet and provide personalised offers? So access to other banks' information that your customers may have with them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, obviously one of the challenges to date, notwithstanding, some older technology, but, I guess one of the challenges to date is that, if you want to have a personal P&L, kind of what I call it, or, a kind of an end-to-end view of your customers', circumstances, that's been a challenge because often, customers do have, multiple banking relationships, even if it's just one product. So, I think, in the confines of all of the, relevant consent and anti-hawking and all the things that obviously we need to, respect and operate within, I think we need to just take that as a given as we kind of work through this conversation. Obviously what this now brings is, we now have a view that we can actually truly help our customers. Obviously we know what products they're using. We can see that end-to-end view. And depending on the consent and obviously the reason why they've done that, I think what that does is it gives a better quality ongoing dialogue that we can be having with our customers, rather than at a point in time, which is often when people kind of engage with a bank or their financial services provider when they have a specific need. So this maybe kind of smooths out that, the discussions, our understanding of customers, therefore adding value to them. So yeah, I think that's kind of one of the sweet spots, for me.
Completely agree, and I think if you think about it from that share of wallet piece, it's really around understanding where that fits for our customers, and then jumping into that journey at the point that they need us.
Yeah,
and that's really, really important. Digital first is strategic play that most banks have gone on and are continuing to, proceed through. However, at the end of the day, we still see such a high level of our membership base is really wanting some interaction at those key decision points. So how do we really integrate all of those pieces? And I think it's really important because I think what this will do for us is allow us it's going to foster innovation. It's going to foster competitiveness and really bring that too. But it'll also do that again with the mutuals in mind. The big four are in the same position. So it's how do we really utilise that to become stronger together?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's something that tailors into that from some consumer research that we did, which told us that we researched 1,000 people, and half of those were mutual customers and half of those were big bank customers. And actually, mutual customers had more financial relationships, so they had 2.8 financial relationships versus the big banks at 2.3. So I guess you can draw a line that says actually maybe the big banks have got broader product suites and they're able to meet more of those customer needs, so that the customer doesn't need as many financial relationships. And I guess what open data is at least gives you the visibility of those relationships. And then to your point, Medina, kind of allows you then to say, okay, well, we've got a great savings account, but it's not quite matching what the big bank is doing. And can we look at building a product that's going to just fill in that gap, and you just give you that extra little bit of insight into how you're...
Absolutely, and it also helps us really identify. If we think about it, most mutuals have quite a strong membership base, but they also have quite a strong membership benefits offering. How do we tie that in? And how do we tie in understanding, the things that they're spending money on with the way in which we connect with other organisations to really build those connections? And the bonus saver nudge was a great example. But what about, energy nudges or, all of the above, really taking that into consideration around utilising the benefits that we're looking to provide our members tailored for them.
Yeah.
So just as one of those slides showed, your consumers do want personalised offers. That is something that you feel is not only worthwhile, but something you need to get into more so with your digitisation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, we've been going this way for a very, very long time. We now do, when you look at banking products, they've relatively stayed the same over quite a long period of time. However, we've done things to really adjust that and personalise it to life cycles or life ages or life stages. There isn't a difference here. It's about the exact same thing. Personalisation generally sits in those bigger buckets and then slows and then obviously tears down. And open data really allows us to get to that lowest middle, that most information possible. So it's how do we continue to bring that closer to that number?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and look, I think historically, you've been able to build, and they've got better and better over time. So, AI and ML models. You can do propensity modelling. I think it's probably the more traditional term. And that gives you the ability to personalise to a degree. I think what this does, once again, with all the confines of kind of what we need to kind of do within the ecosystem, and the consents and the like. This is black and white data, right, on where the customers are at. So you can actually argue that this is kind of hyper personalisation, with the addition of this regime in the data set.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're in our third generation of AI/ML development, if you like. But just thinking over the last year or so, we've had COVID, we've had, inflation, we've had interest rates climb, fairly drastically, if you like, with so many rate rises. Has that driven for you guys more need for digitisation? Have you actually seen that? Have you seen, people like Microsoft say, COVID has driven more use of digital, access? And I can say I myself, who always banked with one of the big banks, have ended up taking 2 other accounts at mutuals because the rate rises weren't being, provided as quick as they should have been. And so you must have seen changes come about in this last year from consumer sentiment.
Yeah, and I'll start with saying from all aspects, whether it be digitisation of processes and the way in which we operate, and thinking about that analogy around the savings product and not getting the savings, that may well be very much a process-driven date that rate is being executed upon. So it's really interesting to understand that digitalisation will continue to grow when you start to look at work from home and we start to look at the way in which Australia is transforming into the new age country and really pulling different levers in the way in which we work and play. Being digital and being able to provide information at a glance. You take a look at AI, you take a look at all of the things that are happening around us, information at a glance will always be one of the most important pieces of technology that we can provide our members.
I think, Tony, there's a couple of things to unpack in terms of what you said there. So, obviously, digitisation, more broadly, in particular in kind of financial services, obviously we're seeing continued trends and volumes of, kind of physical and call centre and digital, and obviously there's that movement, and that's not newsbreak. That's kind of fairly well known. Yes, you've seen further acceleration to that, as a result of obviously the happenings in the world of the last kind of 2 or 3 years. So I think then once again, this is an additional data set plug-in tool, not just a budgeting app, to your point. And typically I think there needs to be an ongoing cycle in terms of, you may launch the PFM in the first instance as an example to solve problem 1, 2, and 3. But then I think the world changes 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the track. So, I think it's always important to go, what's the problem this is actually solving for our customers, noting all the features and benefits, et cetera, that are on there. So kind of reconciling those two things together. And I think then that helps things like, to your point, and I kind of touched on it before, where you've got, people coming off low fixed rates, going on to, quite significant uplifts in certain circumstances. So this solves that. This helps solve part of that problem. And to be clear, it's not the silver bullet, right? But what it does is it helps people, maybe take some expenditure out of their budget, plan further forward and take some of that pain away as I'm going from a 1.89 to a 5.5% or whatever it may be.
Well, and that's a really good point. If you think about it from that process, it's really around a lot of the conversations we're having in the market right now is around serviceability. What better way to utilise money management than to actually get a lower interest rate by being able to switch and being able to manage those finances, those living expenses, etc. So it's really that holistic management that's really important, and understanding where you're at that point in time. And it's more than just a data set. It's absolutely a tool for a better way of living.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where I get onto one of my favourite topics, that I talk about in terms of, I think sometimes the challenge within organisations is that they think about, open banking and the use cases as a product in its own right, as opposed to, how does open banking, open data help us with processes, product enhancements, whatever it may be, rather than it's this thing that sits over here. And that's a transition, kind of early still, but that's a transition, and we can talk about it as we kind of move through the session. But that's certainly something that, I've been focused on in terms of my messaging to go, how does this add value to our existing products? Have we got new products? Yes, we do, obviously, in the product roadmap. So, are we thinking about open banking, or PFMs or other opportunities, etc., as we continue down that journey?
Yeah, that was the thing that actually emerged in the first webinar, which is mutuals are very good at customer service and being close to their customers, and the digitisation should really just help empower that. It shouldn't, as you say, Chris, be a whole separate thing that you're doing with your customers. It really is just about the marriage of what mutual banks do well and how open data can and the forms of digitisation around it can help empower that, and money management's the basis of that in some respects, which is just giving the customer and the mutual bank a 360-degree view of what their finance looks like. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's obviously a theme that's come out already in both of these webinar sessions so far.
So given those views, I guess, and for you, Chris, but even for Medina and Docs, there's always a need to balance investments, right? And I had this question, but I think from your previous answers, it sort of almost come together. And the question I had really was, given that need to balance investments, where do you start? Do you actually start with kind of money management and relationship type capability, or do you look at lending and start with, hey, how does open data or open banking help with my lending journey? Now, are they two separate things?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, maybe if I take a step back, on this, I mean, I think more broadly, as we know, business cases need to stack up. So to me, it's actually probably more, where's the business opportunity or problem that you're solving for, and where's that greater? And that might be different from mutual bank to mutual bank, or, whatever it may be. I think for us, in terms of when we first, partnered with you guys, it was more around, okay, yes, there's this thing called kind of open banking, open data. There was uncertainty in terms of, how quickly or what's the velocity going to be like in terms of, take up. So I think there's an element of, a no regrets investment here, should the market, the ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, take off. And when I say that, we're all participants of that. So we're all accountable for that as well. You want to be in a position where, you're not going to fall behind in terms of your customer service offering or whatever it may be. So, I think there was an element of kind of no regrets in relation to that. Of course, there was also a commercial, business case that was around, yes, engagement, customer experience, etc. How do we do those things? I think on reflection as well, FY23 has all been about, getting it launched, in the banks, and as people know, we run multiple brands, so launching in both brands, getting the frontline, team members familiar with it, understanding it, embedding it in our kind of everyday conversations, etc. And then what we're now doing as we come into FY24 is actually reviewing the measurement, the metrics, how we map that thing, which is obviously directly related to the questions that I was posing before about, what are the problems that this is going to solve for our customers, in the coming FY24, what does that opportunity look like, etc. So I think it's fair to say that there wasn't really, I think your question was which one goes first. I don't necessarily have a view on which one goes first. I think it's, where there's the more burning desire in terms of a business case return. But then my overarching piece is that there's probably an element, depending on kind of, how organisations, executives and boards think, there's probably a no regrets investment element to it here.
Yeah, and I just want to go into that no regrets investment, and we're at very, very different stages of this journey, right? And that's why I really, really enjoyed coming here today, is because we're not way as far down as you guys have been, and really brought into that no regrets. We're really looking for the stack up and ensuring that we understand how the use cases are being happening across Australia before we invest heavily into things like this. And one of the most interesting factors for me has been really understanding not just the banking data, but understanding how all of the other components and open data really helps me as a bank, but us as a group of multiple brands and products. And I think it's really, really important that there is no right way or wrong way. I think it's actually sitting down, having the right conversations at the right time. And, the take up has been a very, very big conversation of mine. And, I've had it many, many times a month. But for us, in the position that we are as a mutual, for us, we sit there and we try and understand when the right time is to jump onto that take up. And it has to do with, your member numbers, and really take an inward view on an outward capability. And I think that's been the really big key for us. And that's why we're at that stage now, because we're seeing really great things in the market, seeing great offers, we're seeing great products, digital products from, third parties, and really looking at how we leverage on that.
Yeah, great.
When you take a broad view of financial well-being, there are many people in need or vulnerable people out there. How do you look at open data helping with that? Or, how do you look at that internally anyway?
Yeah, look, I think once again, what this brings, and, I guess packaged in the right way, it's an opportunity, should people wish to, take that opportunity, to bring discipline. And, once again, obviously, the features and functionality of, things that are available. Absolutely, there's tools and tricks and coaching, etc., whatever it may be, for those in that category. So, I genuinely believe that, they're, once again, targeted in the right manner, working with customers, in that situation, with this. Once again, it's another part of an offering that you can have. Once again, not the silver bullet, but certainly part of the offering to make it stronger, where, we can be working with customers to actually help them, out of a certain situation or whatever it may be, setting some goals, helping to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel, etc. And, once again, this is kind of powering, driving those outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for me. It's really around a lead indicator. So, when we start to talk about hardship, it's forthcoming from a member, but how do we actually play a part in helping them make the right choices before it gets to that point? And that's what insights can do. That's what those nudges can do. And that's that really, really important part for me. So if I was to, wave a perfect wand and say, what would you do? It's really around understanding how do we use this data to go, how do we best help our members not get into a financial hardship discussion with us and actually really preempt those things, understanding the amount of data that we would be holding. We could preempt that, we could trend that, we could take really great modelling and understand some of those trigger points and bring it back in. So we start on lead indicators rather than trying to work backwards. Financial hardship is difficult, but it generally always starts with some sort of vulnerability. So how do we now start to trigger those pieces in and start to understand those trends?
Yeah, I think hardships is a really interesting one, and I know you can talk about that. So I'm glad you raised it. But I mean, it's sort of the old adage of good news is bad news delivered early, right? Now this is through indicators, but once again, the sooner that we can be having those conversations with customers, the better for everyone. And once again, this is yes, could that be done? Prior CDR, yes. Does this kind of help put that on steroids? Absolutely. Does it simplify it? Absolutely. And I think this is kind of where the sweet spots are, in terms of leveraging the ecosystem.
I mean, that's great to hear. I think where customers have credit cards with other banks, and obviously that can lead down that hardship road, then having that data through open banking, open data is actually a good thing to be proactive, because it might not be something that you had visibility of in the past, and yet it's still your customer for other products that they have, be they lending or something else.
Well, they may have savings. Yeah, and, looking at interest rates are great, but credit card interest rates are generally 12 to 25%. So it's really around helping them make the right financial decisions before it gets out of hand.
Yes. I think in terms of the conversations that you do have with consumers or customers, those conversations, your members, I should say, but those conversations that you do have with them and thinking about being proactive, and if you had many insights to choose from, if you like, what kind of insights do you think would you prioritise, and what sort of delivery would you want? Would you want to give them out through an app that they have self-service for, or would you prefer to give them out through a customer relationship manager, call them up and say, we've seen this, if you like, and we have a chat, or both? What kind of delivery method do you think would suit better?
I always err on the side of empowering our members. Right. So I think self-service empowers them to start to learn how to manage their money without a support or without us always, bringing that along. Generally, from a banking point of view, the time that we have a budgeting conversation is when it's lending, right? When it's our lending. But how do we actually really allow them to have those conversations? And I think, if you look at all the data sets and everything they can be seeing, I think to some certain degree we have to understand that our members know how many times they go to the grocery store and how much money they spend at groceries, or fuel. And some of those things, they do know those things. Obviously, they may not keep track of them, but they know those things. It's really around those things that they're not picking up on. It's those insights around those really unique purchases, whether it be the coffee or whether it be, we've talked about that coffee a day, etc. But it's about really giving them the part that they're missing rather than trying to do everything for them. If they're already doing it, let them do it their way, but really being there for them in the parts that they need us.
We've certainly found with some of our existing customers that, to your point, Medina, that things like bill tracking, because those are things that people aren't aware of on a day-to-day basis. It might be an annual bill, like your car registration, something like that, and it comes around every year, but it constantly catches everybody by surprise when it turns up. So being able to know that that's coming, something very simple like that.
And when we started talking about customer relationships, the things that our teams speak to our customers about and members about the most is what are your annual bills and divide them by 12, right? And that is the number one learning curve for most members. It's not how to manage your ins and outs over a fortnightly period. It's managing them over 12 months. So those kind of aspects are undeniably one of the greatest gifts from our open banking.
I have one more question before I go to audience questions. And I think, Chris and Simon, it's one thing to get an organisation excited about what you want to do, about the opportunities, I guess, in this space, but it's another to get a project across the line. So especially with many different competing priorities. So what are some tips you could share about building a business case in this area for, in a way, not only doing digitalisation, but also using or making use of other financial institution data?
Yeah, so I'm happy to kick off. So I mean, look, firstly, it's obviously time, cost, and partner is probably key areas for us. I mean, the reality is this is still a new industry, a new field, whatever you want to call it. In Australia, yes, there's overseas use cases and kind of the UK is ahead of us, for example. So you can look to that to a degree, but I think for us, and working with you guys and certainly, others, kind of bringing additional knowledge in to help with that business case, has been, particularly helpful in the past. And even currently, some of the considerations that we're having around a use case in terms of our time to yes, right? We've come to you, we've gone to others to kind of say, can you give us some numbers and stats around kind of helping the business case stack up? So, but once again, it probably goes back to, a few of my earlier comments in terms of, obviously it does need to commercially stack up, given that there are typically, more priorities than kind of money and capital available. So that's a challenge. I think it's also important to actually work through the organisation in terms of the key stakeholders, in terms of where their thinking may be at. And what I mean by that is that, and I think we kind of touched on this earlier, is that, yes, there's been a huge amount of money spent on compliance. So sometimes when we then come to the compete side of things, which is obviously, what I call, the use cases, et cetera, and the opportunities, often what that means is that there could be some unintended bias in terms of the money spent. And also you've got a business case that says, we want to go and spend this and do this. There might be unintended bias to go, I also need to add X for the compliance element to it. And I do think they need to be treated as very separate. So I think having conversations about where people's kind of mindset is at, I think that's really important as well to get business cases and the thinking across the line.
Yeah, I think you make all great points there, Chris. We've been fortunate to work with a number of mutuals to get open bank business cases through. And in the early years, we probably were looking at, okay, well, this is a silver bullet. We need to do this whole big thing. Yeah. I think these days there's much more options, which are how do you actually get using the data and get started a little faster, whether that's in lending or in money management. You don't have to build a whole PFM. You can take something small like insights off the back of the data and start to generate some value. But absolutely, I think what we hear time and again is you've got to have some kind of ROI. And for us, from the outside, working with mutual banks, we also know that we need to get some support at that board level. It's really critical for them to be supportive of both open data as a concept and then supportive in terms of looking at what options are there across the business and where do they work. And probably my final point on that is one you touched on as well, Chris, which is I think there's lots of ways to get going quickly now, and you don't need to boil the ocean. You can just do something like a pilot program to test and learn. It can be small in scale, but it kind of gets you into the market and understanding what the capability looks like. We've done both. We've done a program and the big project as well. So I think there's options there for people to get going really quickly And the last point really is some people have looked at the regulatory side, as you mentioned, and said, well, we don't want to go through a whole other accreditation piece to get accredited as a data recipient. And we know from evidence from you can see on our mutuals website, Wayne Matters says at Beyond Bank that it took him 6 weeks to get accredited as a data recipient. So we really want to try and help people understand that it's easy now that you've done all the hard lifting to get accredited, to get in the market, and to just start with something really small scale that maybe doesn't require the big return on investment.
I guess, Chris, now, we haven't been using money management that long, let's say, but what have you learned so far from your usage?
Look, I mean, I think now, so we launched, we call it MIMO, MIMO for PNN, MIMO for BCU. So it was October last year and March this year. So, I guess what we've been learning is, what are the conversations we are and aren't having, where do we seem to be getting success in terms of, the conversations, etc. Where can we have metrics that actually have an early indicator in terms of measuring success? So, probably the easier conversations are, when you have a new customer that's coming on board, and, what percentage of those, for example, might have a, take up in terms of, this particular, feature of various products. So, and I think, what I touched on before, it's probably about, we started with this thinking, and that's still relevant in terms of why we started the journey in the first place. But I think it continues to evolve, and that's probably something else that we've learned, to continue to ask ourselves the question: what's the problem this is solving? Reconciling to the features and roadmap that are continue to be built on it, and then are we then injecting that into our kind of existing processes, systems, conversations, customer journey, etc. Because it doesn't stop, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And, as they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. So
Correct.
There needs to be analysis, there needs to be measurement, and then there needs to be that question of, okay, what works best? How do we do it? Test and learn, I guess.
I think the final thing that I would say, and I'm conscious of time, but I think it becomes real, right? And what I mean by it becoming real is that, we had a sort of cross-functional session last week with, products, marketing, retail guys, etc. And when you can show them the aggregated data that you have that's kind of coming through, that's a moment, right? That's a proof point. I was going to say something there, but I won't. But that's a proof point, right? Where people go, I get it, right? So then you start getting that buy-in across the organisation, which is an important part of it as well, right? Making sure that people are thinking about it. It's never necessarily going to be top of mind because we're all busy, but how do you kind of make sure it's in the thinking day to day?
Yeah. Yeah. Medina, I guess in your view, this thing called open data or open banking, is it a threat? Does it provide a means, to be threatened by the big banks, or has that just always been there?
I truthfully don't think that the big banks would have more of a threat with open banking. I think it's actually mutuals who become more threatening. If you think about your majors, the level of data that they hold currently without open banking should be something that we should feel threatened about. However, when you take a look at the data that we'll now hold, I think that's where opportunity comes. And, I think the big banks and mutual kind of, like I say, wall, but it's a lot nicer than that, I think. But understanding that, the focus for us around open data and really understanding it is to build benefit for our members. We understand as an organisation and as an industry what that means for the Big Four too. And I think now our members do too, especially with the digitalisation. I think people are really starting to understand the benefits of mutual banking as an overarching aspect, but also the benefits of understanding the purpose of an organisation. So I'm less worried than most would expect, but I think I'm more excited.
So I'll bring a slightly different, maybe controversial perspective on that. I think absolutely yes is the answer to your question if we as a mutual sector don't do anything about it, right? And I don't think there's much of an excuse, you know, in particular budgets, because there's plenty of partners, you know, people willing to help that aren't kind of, relatively speaking, you know, huge investments. You know, the majors will invest here. You know, they have war chests, you know, clearly larger than those in the mutual sector. But there are options through partnering or whatever it may be where the investment is relatively modest. That kind of helps them drive the income. The opportunity. Because I think if we sit and wait and watch, that an unintended consequence of open data and open banking could be that it creates a lot more competition between the four majors and everyone else misses out. So I know that's kind of, you know, that's a hard message, but, you know, I guess the takeaway for me that is that, you know, be curious about this, investigate the options, try hard with the business case, think about your metrics, think about how it integrates in all that you do. And then I think you're starting to be on the right track in terms of actually trying to get something up and participating in this space.
That makes sense. And I guess even in my past experience, you don't want to be caught in the crossfires of some type of war that's going on, you know, and being unintended consequence. So I think we're getting close to running out of time. 5 minutes left is the hands telling me. One of the other audience questions, Simon, was just simply about when is the industry expecting non-bank lending to be announced and commence? What's your understanding?
So I think it's probably about 5-6 months away, towards the end of this year. They'll announce, well, they first of all need to announce the parameters around who's going to be in and out of non-bank lending. It's a very big sector. And then once they have those set, then there'll be a lead in time, obviously, for them to be compliant. I know that quite a few of them have been in touch with us in a probably more of an education point of view, but they are looking at okay, how do we get into this? What are going to be our requirements to be a data holder? And they're looking at both sides. So they know the compliance piece is coming, and they're saying, okay, well, how do we get value out of it as well? So I think it's going to be very interesting for those guys coming in, and for a lot of them, it's going to be about where does Treasury draw the line in terms of who needs to be compliant. But it will add quite a lot to the open banking offer, to be including non-bank lenders in there.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking forward to having super included in that aggregator view, and I think it was over 12, 18 months ago now, probably 18 months ago, we proposed a scheme for a super light that would allow kind of, you know, a limited amount of super data to be, you know, included, if you like, but it got wrapped up in that analysis, and it's also kind of paused until we work out, all the regulators work out, you know, where uses are going to come from and what the benefit is, which is a good thing. I think just we're pretty much closing now, so I just really want to say thank you. Really say thank you to, you know, the panel, Medina and Chris. That was great. I'd probably encourage the regulators out there to watch this webinar and see what they can glean from it as well, because there were quite a lot of other types of insights coming from it as well. So thank you very much again.